Hi.
Hi, how are you?
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Thanks for having us.
Hi.
Hi, it's Eric, Marina,
Hi.
my cameraman Lee, and John. Sit down, please. This week we'll remember the terrorist attacks of 9/11, an event which of course had a profound impact on your prime ministership. In your book you consider Islamic extremism as one of the greatest threats to the world, as not the greatest threat. In Holland we've got a politician who warns with passion against the same threat, Geert Wilders. And he maybe goes even a step further. He calls Islam a fascist ideology and he thinks the Quran should be banned. Do you share his view, or parts of it?
No. No, I think, look, you've got a classic example in what this pastor in the US is doing. So he wants to burn the Quran. He is a Christian. He's part of the Christian religion. He does not represent Christianity, right? He doesn't represent me, I'm a Christian. He doesn't represent hundreds of millions of Christians who want to show respect towards Islam. Likewise, those people who engage in terrorism in the name of Islam pervert its proper meaning. And I encourage people actually, rather than burning the Quran, to read it. Because they will find it interesting and fascinating, as I do for someone of the Christian faith. And it is essentially a peaceful religion. And for many, many years, Islam was at the forefront of science and culture and progress. So no, I'm for a world of peaceful coexistence between religions, not for stigmatizing or demonizing.
I was talking about Geert Wilders, the Dutch politician, who was actually banned from the UK. Do you think that was a right decision to ban him?
I don't know, really. I wasn't in office at the time, so they may have had information I don't. I mean, basically, I'm more in favour of taking people on in argument than saying I don't want to hear your point of view, but I don't agree with it at all. And it's not the way the world can work. And one of the difficult things with someone like Wilders is that some of what they say, right, will strike people in a particular way. And what's important for people like me to do is to say, yes, it's true. There is extremism that does associate itself with Islam. We should admit that and confront it. And what I say in my book is, we've got to be very clear about this. This extremism exists. You can't say it's nothing to do with the religion of Islam any more than you can say extremists who killed people in Northern Ireland in the name of religion are nothing to do with Christianity. But the way of dealing with it is not then to go and stigmatize all Muslims or say they're all bad people, but on the contrary, together, reasonable, modern-minded people within all religions to come together and fight the extremism and fight the narrative associated with it.
You consider Saddam Hussein as part of that extremism within the Islamic world. You even call it in your book a moral necessity to get rid of him. Does that imply we should have got rid of him even if you had known he didn't have weapons of mass destruction? No,
the only basis for getting rid of him was on security basis. But what's really important, one of the things I do in the book, is because people have now gone to the other extreme with Saddam, right? They've said, okay, you didn't find an active WMD program, therefore he was actually not such a bad person after all. That's not correct. I mean, if you look at the Iraq survey group that was conducted after the fall of Saddam and where the interviews with the scientists and technicians were conducted, it's clear as indeed the survey group finds that had we left him there, he would have then reconstituted his program with the know-how and possibly then with the oil price going up so much with the money. So the reason I don't regret it, getting rid of him, is not just because he was a bad person, but because I think he was a threat.
Is it a moral necessity to topple the regime in Iran?
No, it's not a moral necessity, but it's a strategic necessity, in my view, to say they shouldn't have a nuclear weapon. I spend a lot of time out in the Middle East at the moment. That regime with a nuclear weapon is not a good idea. It's a very dangerous thing. So it's not that I don't want military action on Iran. I hope sanctions can work. I hope diplomacy can work.
But we shouldn't exclude them.
I don't think you can, because I think the consequences of a nuclear-armed Iran are very, very serious. It would, I'm out in the Middle East the whole time. It would hugely destabilize that region. And, they're not, because of the nature of the regime, I think it's very you know, it's very dangerous. They're a regime that I can see in the work that I do in Palestine, for example, how they are fomenting terrorism and instability, and directed from the regime. Now, you give that regime then the nuclear capability, I think it's a very dangerous thing to do.
You use the word moral in your book quite a lot. I talked about moral necessity.
Yeah.
That we should ask ourselves moral questions when you want to intervene in foreign affairs.
Yeah. Not only moral questions, but I mean, it's a part of it, yeah.
It's an important part of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Why is that?
Because I think, you know, in politics today, particularly with the world so interconnected, and this is the reason I intervened in Kosovo, you know, it's unlikely that if you've got a terrible thing happening in one part of the world, it's going to remain separated and isolated from the rest of the world. I've always believed that in today's world, there is an enlightened view of self-interest that means that it's actually in your interests to try and make the world better, tackle poverty, promote peace. So I think you can sometimes get into a situation where you divide too fiercely moral purpose on the one hand and national self-interest on the other.
You got rid of one Arab dictator. At the same time, you shook hands with another one in a Bedouin tent in Libya, Colonel Gaddafi. Doesn't that undermine your argument?
No, it actually makes it, because the whole point about Gaddafi was that he gave up the WMD program of Libya. You know, people always say to me, it was inevitable you guys were going to get rid of Saddam. I say it's not. He could have done what Gaddafi did.
That's right. He gave up the weapons of mass destruction, or the program.
Yeah.
But again, to go back to that moral question which you ask in your book, and when you talk about Kosovo and Iraq, should we tolerate people suffering in their countries? The fact is, Colonel Gaddafi is still quite a brutal dictator who tortures his people. And
you know, there's a process of political change that I would support completely in Libya, and that's why I say to you, it's not. You know, the reason that we got rid of Saddam was not simply because he was a bad person. That, I'm afraid, is not a reason sufficient unto itself to don't take military action. But actually, I think the nature of what is happening in Libya is also different. You know, I think most people understand there is a difference between a regime like Saddam's, and even though, as I say, I support a process of political change all over the Middle East, is what I think has got to happen in the end. But I wouldn't say that you could not conceivably compare Saddam and Gaddafi. I don't think that would be fair or right.
Yeah, that's what you call in your book both your hard and your soft approach. Mm-hmm. Does it also imply you could actually negotiate or talk to Al-Qaeda?
It's very difficult to see what you negotiate about.
You talked with another terrorist group in Northern Ireland.
I did, but you know, they had an identifiable cause that you can't say is an unreasonable cause. Whether you agree with it or not is another matter, right? They want a united Ireland. With Al-Qaeda, they want a sort of 7th century caliphate. I don't know what you negotiate about.
It's not identifiable for you maybe, but it might be for them.
That's true, but I don't see how you compromise with it. You know, a group of people who actually believe you should stone a woman to death because she's got a love life you don't like. I don't know where you start with them, really, because I don't think there's much of a meeting point. Which is not to say, incidentally, in the context of Afghanistan, I'm perfectly in favour if there are elements of the Taliban that can be brought into the mainstream of Afghan politics. I'm not opposed to that at all. And as you rightly say, in Northern Ireland, the IRA are different, I would say, I'm afraid.
Let's talk about your role as a peace envoy in the Middle East. In your own country and in other parts of the world, you've become a controversial politician because of the war in Iraq. Does it make your job as a Middle East envoy not difficult, not to say impossible?
Not really. I mean, honestly, the people I deal with in Israel and Palestine are focused on their dispute. Also, the thing to remember about people in the Middle East is that some of them disagree strongly with the action I took in Iraq, but they weren't sad to see Saddam go. You know, he was a hugely destabilizing factor around that region. I mean, he used to fund, these weren't the reasons we took the decision, but funding Palestinian suicide bombers and so on. I mean, it was, this thing is a lot, you know, I can honestly say it's very rare that someone raises this in the context of the work I do in the Middle East.
How key is solving the Palestine-Israeli conflict to tackle the wider problem, the struggle within the Islamic world?
Central. Resolving the Israel-Palestine issue. It's not the cause of this problem between the West and Islam and all the issues that we know about, the extremism. It's not the cause. But resolving the Israeli-Palestinian dispute would be a major part of resolving this problem.
Almost a necessary condition.
Almost, yeah. I think you could say that. I mean, some people would disagree with that and think you're putting too much weight on this issue, but I think for the Arab world particularly, if this issue was resolved, I think along with its resolution would come a whole series of attitudes and changes that would be very beneficial for them and for us.
In the 80s, we always talked about the three conflicts that were the so-called eternal conflicts. South Africa, Northern Ireland, Israel-Palestine. Two of them are solved. Why is this not happening in Israel-Palestine?
Well, it's a good question. I don't know, really. I mean, I think it's partly because there are external players in Israel and Palestine in a way, there wasn't quite in the same way. You know, South Africa had to resolve its issue, you know. In Northern Ireland, I mean, America played a part as well as the UK and the Republic of Ireland, of course, but there was nobody actively coming in from the outside to destabilize the peace process. Whereas I think the one different facet with the Israel-Palestine question is that it's become mixed up in this whole bigger issue to do with, you know, extremism, what's the relationship between the West and Islam and so on. So I think, I mean, if I had to offer an explanation, it's that. But having said that, we can solve it, and we must.
Last week you were in Washington, first round of talks again, first ones in 2 years, I believe, that there's direct negotiations. Is this a really big step forward, or should we be cynical again and think this is going to lead to nowhere as it happened in the past 20 years?
No, it's a really big step forward. The fact that President Obama has made this a priority at the outset of his time in office is a big thing and very welcome thing. We've got to get through this issue to do with the moratorium on settlements and work out a way through that. And I'll be back out in the region shortly. But if we get this going, I think we've got a real chance, because the thing always to remember about the Middle East peace process is that actually there is basic agreement as to the outcome: a secure state of Israel, a viable independent state of Palestine. The rest is negotiation. Now, I think if we can get the right alignment between changes on the ground and building the Palestinian state from the bottom up and a worthwhile negotiation, then provided also we can resolve the situation in Gaza, which is very, very difficult, but provided we could get that benign conjunction of circumstances, then I think, yeah, I'm sure it can be done.
When you read your book, it feels almost like you're itching to get back into it.
Yeah, well, I know it's funny that I don't. Well, I still have a lot to say to my own country, and part of the trouble when you leave office when you're young is, I mean, relatively young, is, you know, you still got a lot of energy. And also because I think for countries like ours, I mean, this is why, I mean, I would have done the European job if they'd offered it to me. I suppose I can't help still feeling motivated.
When you speak like this, it feels like you're back again.
Well,
would you ever consider a return to British politics? Would you like that?
Look, I think it's frankly really unlikely. Really, really unlikely. But, you know, when people say to me, so you're excluding it, I think, well, why should I? You know, you're not obliged to. But if you ask me, do I think there is any reasonable expectation? No, but who knows? You know, we live in an era of low predictability.
Well, you shouldn't exclude it, but you could exclude it because it was grueling, if I read especially about the last years of your prime ministership.
Yeah, and you may be right that I'm forgetting what it was like when I was there. You know, I sometimes look back on those times now and I think, yeah, you know, it was great.
You forget the
to
pain.
do it, and then you forget the pain if you're not careful. And there was a lot of pain along the